told you not to come here. It's too dangerous. They are watching the house.
None of these kids are even his.
Really, darling?
How wonderful.
This billionaire pretended to be in a coma. What his wife said at the hospital changed everything. No, listen to me. He left 10 minutes ago. Everything's in place. The brakes will fail before he even hits the highway. That was the first thing Victor Langston heard as he stepped out of his Bentley. Having forgotten a confidential file on the kitchen counter, he froze. The voice on the other side of the front door was unmistakably Candace. His wife of 20 years. Polished. Calculated. Once he's dead, I'll play the grieving widow. The media will eat it up. Then we vanish. Just you and me, Darren. You promised. Victor's fingers tightened around the car keys. A cold sweat broke across his forehead. He leaned back slowly, careful not to make a sound. His heart pounded. Not from fear, but disbelief. Darren, that was his personal trainer. And the kids. A man's voice asked. Don't worry, she whispered. They don't even care about him. They only text when they need a new iPhone or college tuition. Once he's gone, everything transfers to me. The will's airtight. Victor didn't hear the rest. He staggered back like the words had punched him in the chest. He wasn't just being used. He was being erased. Victor Langston, 58 billionaire, father of 3. CEO of Langston Enterprises. A man who built an empire from a single box of imported wristwatches and turned it into a multinational logistics conglomerate. To the world, he was a titan. To his family, he was a walking ATM. They smiled for family photos, kissed him on the cheek at gala dinners. But when the lights were off, and the cameras gone, so was the affection. Candace, always radiant on Victor's arm, hadn't said I love you in 3 years. Their children, Daniel, Michelle, and Ryan, only reached out when something was wrong with their cards. Still, Victor had convinced himself that was normal, that love changed over time, that his role as a provider was enough. Until now. He walked slowly back to his car, parked just outside the gate, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. 1,000 thoughts whirled in his head. He could go to the police, confront her, fire Darren, rewrite the will. But none of that felt right. He didn't want revenge. He wanted truth. Not just about Candace, about everything. So he made one phone call, to Dr. Charles Greer, his private physician, and oldest friend, and within 2 hours, Victor Langston, billionaire husband and betrayed father, would be lying unconscious in a private hospital suite, bandaged from head to toe, his body appearing broken beyond repair, declared in a coma after a devastating car crash. Candace would get the call soon, and everything would begin. The lights in the private hospital suite were dimmed. The machines beside the bed blinked steadily, as if echoing the steady breath of the man lying still beneath crisp white sheets. Victor Langston looked every bit the coma patient the world believed him to be. Bandages on his arms, a neck brace gently hugging his throat, 4 fluids dripping into his veins, a heart monitor chirping calmly by his side. But he wasn't in a coma. He was very much awake. The sedatives had worn off, just as Dr. Charles Greer promised they would. Enough to calm his body for a few hours, but not enough to knock him out completely. Now, his body remained motionless, his breathing shallow, his eyelids fluttering just enough to seem believable. This was no hospital stunt. This was survival strategy. Victor had spent his life outsmarting boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and economic recessions, but nothing prepared him for the battle inside his own home. Dr. Charles stood just outside the glass wall, watching the monitors, and the hidden 4K camera embedded discreetly above the medical light. It was angled perfectly, capturing the entire room, including every expression, every whispered word that might escape the lips of anyone who thought. Victor Langston could no longer hear them. The news had already broken. Within minutes of the staged accident, headlines flashed across national media. Breaking. Billionaire Victor Langston, critically injured in auto crash, currently in coma, at Langston Memorial Hospital. And still, Candace hadn't shown up. Not one call. Not a single text. Until now. At exactly 11:13 a.m., the door opened. The perfume hit first. Sweet, expensive, and ironically, Victor's favorite. A fragrance he hadn't smelled on her skin in years. Then came the sound of heels and laughter. Candace, followed by a deeper voice that made Victor's blood chill. Darren, the man who smiled in his face every week during private workouts, now standing at the foot of his hospital bed with his arm wrapped casually around Candace's waist. Damn, Darren muttered, staring at Victor. He really looks out of it. Candace leaned in, her lips inches from her husband's ear. Doctors say his brain functions dropped. Not dead, but close. He won't wake up, not ever. Victor's fingers twitched, but just barely. The camera caught it. Dr. Charles saw it. He was still in control. Candace placed her hand on his chest. Poor Victor, she whispered with mock concern. You worked so hard, you built everything. And in the end, you couldn't even see what was right under your nose. Victor remained perfectly still, because now wasn't the time to move. It was time to listen, and what he would hear next would shake the very meaning of fatherhood. Candace lingered by Victor's hospital bed, gently brushing a strand of hair away from his forehead, like a doting wife. Her voice was soft, syrupy sweet, but every word dripped poison.com. You know what hurts the most? She said, turning to Darren. He used to call them my legacy. Can you believe that? The man raised 3 kids, thinking they were his flesh and blood. Darren leaned casually against the wall, arms folded, watching her with amusement. You mean they're not? Candace laughed lightly. None of them. Daniel is yours. You know that. You were there when he was born, even if Victor was too blind to notice. Michelle, well, she was a wild summer fling with that French designer I met in Paris. And Ryan, she shrugged, could be Marcus or Thomas. Honestly, I stopped counting. Victor's heart thudded in his chest, but his body stayed still. An anchor in a storm of lies. Every word struck deeper than the last. He remembered Michelle's first piano recital. The way she clung to his arm when she got scared. He remembered Ryan's 6th birthday party. How Victor built the treehouse with his bare hands, just to make him smile. He remembered Daniel, the oldest, his mini-me. Or so he thought. All of it. Fake. His entire identity as a father. Fabricated. And the best part, Candace whispered, her voice full of cruel glee. He never even asked. Never suspected. He was too busy working, making money, playing the hero. All I had to do was smile, wear a tight dress, and moan twice a week. Darren chuckled. You're cold, babe. Candace smirked. No, I'm practical. And after he's officially declared brain dead, we collect everything. His board of directors will pass the company to me temporarily. His offshore accounts. I already have the access codes. Victor lay frozen. Not from fear, but fury. They weren't just trying to steal his money. They were rewriting his entire life. His identity. His children. No, not children. They weren't his. He wasn't a husband. He wasn't a father. He was just a means to an end. And still, he listened carefully, like a hunter in the tall grass, waiting for the right moment to pounce. Once we wrap things up, Candace said, stepping back from the bed, we disappear. Change our names. New passports. Santorini first. Then Dubai. He'll be mourned as a national icon. And I'll cry on camera. Then we're gone. Victor's jaw clenched ever so slightly beneath the oxygen tube. The tiny movement was undetectable to the untrained eye, but the camera saw it. Charles, watching live from the control room, leaned forward and whispered, just hold on, Vic, let them dig their own grave. And dig they would, because the man they thought was helpless, was about to rise from the ashes. 2 days passed. Victor remained in the hospital bed, motionless but fully aware. Every morning, Dr. Charles entered and pretended to examine him, while secretly updating him through subtle taps and coded phrases. No one suspected a thing. Candace, on the other hand, began acting like the queen of a crumbling empire she thought was hers. She paraded through the hospital halls in designer sunglasses and fake tears, accepting flowers and camera flashes like she was born for tragedy. Her public performance was flawless. But Victor had already begun working behind the curtain. The night after Candace's shocking revelation, Charles returned to the room, locked the door behind him, and leaned in close. She's getting bold, Charles whispered. She's already contacted your legal team to ask about power of attorney. She claims you gave her full rights 2 months ago. Victor remained still, but his index finger moved just slightly. Twice. It was their code for let's go. Charles nodded. We're activating the other plan. You want the footage leaked to your lawyer. One blink. Yes. That night, a flash drive containing every word Candace and Darren had uttered at Victor's bedside. About the children, the murder plot, the money. was hand-delivered to Elijah Morton, Victor's personal attorney of 18 years. Elijah didn't sleep. By morning, the will had been pulled from the vault. Candace had never read it. She'd never bothered. She assumed everything went to her. After all, she'd spent 2 decades manipulating a man she believed was too busy to read between the lines. What she didn't know. Victor Langston had rewritten his will just 6 months earlier. He'd noticed the emotional distance, the empty smiles, the cold kisses, and though he wasn't sure of the full extent of the betrayal, he'd prepared for it. In the new version, the bulk of his assets, stocks, real estate, and company shares, were placed in an irrevocable trust, managed by Elijah, not Candace. The trust stipulated that access would only be granted if DNA confirmed the children were biologically his, and the kicker. If any attempt was made to harm or manipulate him, directly or indirectly, the trust would dissolve and be donated entirely to 3 charities for orphaned children. The same clause carried a criminal investigation trigger, linked directly to the district attorney's office. Candace had walked right into it. Darren, he wasn't even mentioned, and soon, he wouldn't even be a free man. Charles returned that afternoon with a subtle nod. It's done, he whispered to Victor. The DA's office has the flash drive. Elijah's preparing a court order to freeze all accounts. Victor's chest rose slightly. An involuntary breath of satisfaction. The stage was almost set. But the show hadn't begun yet. He still had one final act to prepare. And when the curtain rose, they would all be watching. The hospital's press room was buzzing. Reporters whispered among themselves. Camera crews adjusted their lenses. Nurses leaned against walls, secretly recording with their phones. At exactly 10 a.m., Candace, Langston swept into the room, in a black dress, so sharp it could slice through silk. Oversized sunglasses masked her eyes, but nothing could hide the carefully choreographed grief on her face. She stepped up to the podium like a seasoned actress, head bowed, voice trembling in all the right places. "Thank you all for being here," she began, pausing for effect. "These past few days have been the hardest of my life. My husband, Victor Langston, has always been a fighter, a man of strength, a vision. And though he lies in a coma, I know deep in my soul that he hears us." She sniffed, delicately pulling a tissue from her clutch. "Our children are devastated, but we are staying strong. For Victor, for his legacy." Behind the scenes, Charles stood in a hallway, watching the live stream on his phone with Elijah beside him. Elijah was stone-faced, his knuckles tight around a brown envelope, the original will, signed and notarized. "She's good," Charles muttered. Elijah didn't blink. "She's dead." Inside the press room, Candace continued her performance. "I have spoken to his board of directors. With their support, I will temporarily manage the affairs of Langston Enterprises, until Victor either recovers, or—" She let the words hang in the air, inviting sympathy, maybe even applause. That's when the door to the room opened, and Victor's youngest, Ryan, walked in. Candace froze for a fraction of a second. Ryan was supposed to be away at college in Chicago. She hadn't told him the truth, but he stood there now, expressionless, with a folder in hand. He walked right up to the podium and handed it to her. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tight. "Dad's attorney sent it to me," he said quietly, looking her directly in the eyes. "He thought I deserved to know the truth. We all did." Candace's hands trembled as she opened the folder and scanned the contents. Then her face turned pale. Inside was a copy of the new will, a DNA test requisition form, and at the top of the stack, a still frame taken from a hidden camera. In it, she was leaning over Victor's hospital bed, with Darren's hand around her waist. The room was silent. Reporters stared. Flashes clicked, once, then twice, and then all at once. Candace looked up, eyes wide, stunned. This is doctored. It's fake. But she couldn't finish, because behind her, on the room's projector screen, the video had started playing, clear, unedited, undeniable. Her voice filled the room. "None of these kids are even his." For a split second, the world stopped. Candace's mouth hung open, as her own voice echoed across the press room, playing on a 17-inch screen behind her. Every person in the room was frozen. Reporters with mics mid-air, cameramen holding their breath. Even the janitor at the back stopped sweeping. "Once he's dead, we'll vanish. New names, new country. I already have a villa in Santorini waiting. Her voice was crystal clear, her face unmistakable. Darren's arm looped casually around her waist. A quiet gasp rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Candace spun around and lunged for the laptop playing the footage. "Turn it off. This is illegal. He's violating my privacy." But it was too late. The damage was done. Darren, watching from his car outside the hospital on a live stream, floored the accelerator in panic. He didn't make it 2 blocks before an unmarked black SUV blocked his path. 4 federal agents surrounded the vehicle. He was in handcuffs within seconds. Back in the hospital, Candace's phone buzzed in her purse. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. One of the reporters stepped forward, microphone trembling in his hand. "Mrs. Langston, do you deny saying these things?" Candace didn't answer. Her hands gripped the podium so tight, her knuckles turned white. Another reporter asked, "Are you aware that falsifying power of attorney and tampering with a medical case for personal gain is a federal offense?" Her head snapped up. "This is a setup. Victor did this. He's manipulating you all. He's not even in a coma, is he?" But that's when the double doors opened. And Victor Langston stepped in, alive, walking, eyes calm, face unreadable. Gasps filled the room. Cameras flashed wildly. People stood. Candace stared at him like she'd seen a ghost. Victor said nothing at first. Just walked up to her. One slow step at a time. Dressed in a tailored black suit. He looked nothing like a man who just survived a coma. He stopped inches from her. "You said something to me a few nights ago. I think it was. You couldn't even see what was right under your nose." His voice was low. "Turns out you were right." Candace stumbled backward. "Victor, I can explain." He raised his hand. "No. You've explained enough." He turned to the room. "To everyone here, thank you for witnessing this. You've just seen the real Candace Langston. The woman I gave 20 years of my life to. The mother of 3 children I believed were mine." Reporters leaned in, capturing every word. "I built my empire on truth, loyalty, and sacrifice. Today, I reclaim all of it." Security stepped forward. Elijah entered beside them with court papers. Candace's voice broke. "Victor, please, let's talk. The kids," he turned one last time, "are not mine." Then he walked away. And for the first time in her life, Candace Langston was truly alone. The fallout was swift. Within 24 hours, the footage had gone viral. Major news outlets, gossip blogs, business networks, all ran the headline. "Billionaire fakes coma to expose wife's murder plot. What she said in his hospital room stuns the world." Victor didn't need to do interviews. The truth was loud enough. But behind the scenes, the story was far from over. At Langston Memorial Hospital, he sat quietly in his suite. Not as a patient anymore, but as a man watching years of deception unravel. Across the room, Elijah opened a brown envelope. The DNA test came back. Victor didn't react. He'd already braced himself for this. "They're not yours," Elijah confirmed. "None of them. Not Daniel, not Michelle, not Ryan." Victor nodded slowly. He had suspected it, especially after hearing. Candace glowed about it like it was some twisted badge of honor. But hearing it officially, on paper, was another matter. "Did they know?" he asked. Elijah shook his head. "I spoke to Ryan. He's confused. But he didn't know. None of them did." Victor leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "They grew up in my house, ate my food, called me dad. And maybe," Elijah said gently, "that's still what you are. Blood or not." But Victor's silence said otherwise. To him, it wasn't about biology anymore. It was about betrayal. Meanwhile, Candace had gone into hiding. Or tried to. But she couldn't outrun the law. Or public judgment. Her frozen accounts, seized properties, and pending charges for attempted murder and fraud were only the beginning. And Darren, he sang like a bird. He admitted to tampering with Victor's car, revealed every account transfer Candace made, and even confessed to manipulating Victor's assistant into leaking confidential files. But Victor wasn't focused on them anymore. He had one last thing to do. That afternoon, all 3 children, Daniel, Michelle, and Ryan, were escorted into a conference room on the top floor of Langston Enterprises. It was the first time they'd seen their father since the accident. Or the coma, rather. Victor stood at the head of the table, calm and reserved, in a charcoal gray suit. Behind him, a massive portrait of the Langston legacy. The room was quiet. Ryan spoke first. Is it true? Victor looked at him. The youngest. The one who used to run to him in the hallway just to hug his leg. Yes, Victor said. I'm not your biological father. Daniel looked down, ashamed. Michelle blinked rapidly, as if holding back tears. But that's not why you're here. They looked up. You're here because you need to decide who you want to be going forward. You can chase after your mother's lies, or stand on your own feet and become something better. Michelle whispered, You mean you're not cutting us off? Victor paused, then said quietly, The trust is sealed. You'll need to earn your inheritance from the ground up. And with that, he stood. Your last name is Langston. Now prove it matters. The next morning, the sun rose over Los Angeles with a golden glow that felt almost symbolic. The skyline shimmered. But inside Langston Enterprises, a storm was still brewing. One that Victor now faced with unwavering clarity. For the first time in weeks, he returned to his corner office on the 54th floor. The room was exactly as he left it. His polished walnut desk, the family portrait still on the shelf, the silent hum of his wall-sized stock screen, flickering like a heartbeat. He walked to the window and stared out at the city. The empire he built. The life he nearly lost. He wasn't the same man who walked out of his mansion days ago. He wasn't the man who blindly handed out love to people who only saw his worth in numbers. He wasn't the man who tolerated betrayal to preserve an illusion of family. He was something else now. Reborn. Behind him, Charles entered quietly and placed 2 documents on the desk. The court approved everything, he said. Candace and Darren will be arraigned by Friday. Wire fraud. Attempted murder. Identity falsification. The DA's building a mountain. Victor nodded, eyes still on the city. Let it bury them. Charles hesitated. And the kids. Victor turned. Daniel starts work next week in the warehouse, he said calmly. Michelle has an internship with the corporate legal team. Ryan asked to shadow in finance. No more black cards. No more private jets. Charles raised a brow. Tough love. Victor exhaled. Real love. He sat, unbuttoned his blazer, and opened a red leather-bound journal. One he hadn't touched in years. He wrote a single sentence. A man who loses everything, sees everything clearly. Charles glanced around. You're really not taking them back. Victor's jaw tightened. They were never with me to begin with. I gave them 20 years. I won't give them 20 more just because I survived. Charles understood. The pain was too deep to reverse. Victor had buried his former self in that hospital room. This new version was colder. Yes, but wiser, sharper, untouchable. Suddenly, Elijah entered with an envelope. This just arrived, he said. From Candace's lawyer. You'll want to see it. Victor opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter. Victor, if you're reading this, it means I've lost. And maybe I deserve to. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I did love you once. Before the money. Before the lies. Before I lost myself. Candace. Victor read it twice. Then slowly, without a word, he lit a match from the box on his desk, and dropped the letter into a crystal ashtray. It curled and blackened into silence. He looked out the window once more. No more lies. No more masks. No more love bought with diamonds or dinners. Just Victor Langston. A man who pretended to be in a coma, and woke up stronger than ever. The following week, Langston Enterprises buzzed with a new kind of energy. No longer the sterile, transactional atmosphere of the past, but something more grounded, more human. Victor's return wasn't just a comeback. It was a quiet revolution. He started showing up unannounced at the factory floor, walking among workers who had only ever seen him on magazine covers. He asked questions, took notes, ate lunch with interns. The media dubbed it the resurrection of Victor Langston. But inside, Victor knew it wasn't a resurrection. It was the first time he was truly living. Across the city, Daniel Langston stood awkwardly in a navy jumpsuit in the Langston warehouse, holding a barcode scanner. For the first time in his life, he punched a time card. He answered to a supervisor. He had dirt on his hands, and strangely, he didn't hate it. Michelle, in a modest gray skirt suit, sat nervously at the corporate legal desk, taking notes during a contract dispute. Her makeup was lighter, her voice quieter. She listened more than she spoke now. And Ryan, sweet, sensitive Ryan, walked behind the finance team lead, eyes wide as he absorbed the structure, the discipline, the reality of the business world. None of them had heard from their mother. Victor hadn't blocked her. But he didn't reach out either. Some bridges don't need burning. They simply rot away. One night, as the office lights dimmed, and most employees had left, Victor sat in the executive lounge, nursing a glass of water, staring at the fire crackling in the modern hearth. He thought of everything, the coma, the betrayal, the truth about the children, and he felt strangely at peace. Charles entered quietly and sat beside him. How long are you going to keep them at arm's length? Victor sipped. Until I believe they're not just better, but real. Charles nodded. And if they are? Victor stared at the flames. Then maybe I'll start again. But this time not as a billionaire. Just as a man. Charles studied his friend's profile. The lines etched deep by pain and power, but now softened by purpose. You know, he said, most men would have sued, vanished, or gone mad. You staged a coma. Victor smirked. I didn't stage it to escape. I staged it to see clearly. A long silence followed. Then Victor stood, buttoned his jacket, and said something that surprised even himself. I want to build something new. Not just profit. Not just power. I want to build people. Charles raised a brow. And what about love? Victor paused. Then quietly, with no bitterness, just truth, he replied. Love, when it's real, doesn't need to be bought. It reveals itself in silence. Not seduction. He turned to leave. And behind him, the fire crackled on, quietly burning the last of the old Victor Langston. 1 month later, invitations began arriving at the doorsteps of politicians, journalists, employees, and even a few unsuspecting. They were elegant, cream-colored envelopes, with gold trim, sealed with a simple VL crest. Inside, the message was brief. You are cordially invited to the Victor Langston Foundation Gala. A night of new beginnings. No location, no press release, just a date, and a request to come with an open heart. When the night finally arrived, hundreds of guests showed up to find the gala was not at a 5-star hotel, not in a private mansion, but in a massive converted warehouse in East LA, one of Victor's first distribution centers, now transformed into a breathtaking ballroom. The floors were polished, chandeliers hung from steel beams, and walls were lined with framed photographs of Langston employees, janitors, forklift drivers, secretaries, nurses, all dressed in black and gold. The stories of their lives were displayed beneath each image. At the center of it all was Victor, dressed in a simple black suit, no tie, no grand entrance, just standing there, shaking hands, hugging old friends, smiling like a man who had finally found oxygen again. When he stepped on stage, the room hushed. He looked around and spoke. Not with the booming voice of a CEO, but with the raw clarity of a man who had been broken and rebuilt. Some of you know me as a billionaire, he began. Some as a businessman, a boss, a father, a husband. I've worn many masks. He paused. But recently, I learned that not every smile is sincere. Not every I love you is love. And sometimes, the people closest to you can be the ones holding the knife. The crowd was still. But I also learned something else. He continued. You can fake a coma, but you can't fake purpose. You can lose blood ties and still build a real family. And you can lose everything, only to find what truly matters. He turned slightly toward the side of the room, where Daniel, Michelle, and Ryan stood. They weren't dressed in luxury tonight. No designer heels. No gold chains. Just humility in their eyes. And hope in their hands. Victor looked at them, his voice softening. I may not be your biological father, but I'm giving you the same choice I gave myself. Build something real, or let your past define you. Then he turned back to the audience. I've created the Victor Langston Foundation. Not to grow my fortune, but to grow people. To fund schools, shelters, startups for single parents. Real people, real dreams, no hidden contracts, no fine print. A standing ovation erupted, but Victor simply smiled, stepped down from the stage, and joined the crowd. He didn't need applause. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. He'd already done what no amount of money could buy. He reclaimed his name, and redefined his legacy.